Um, we've got three brilliant speakers again. I'm always amazed. I ask people to do these things. They go, "Yeah, I'll do that." I say, "Oh, that's very good of you." There's a lot of these people that have joined us today have got busy lives, busy jobs, all sorts of things going on. So thank you to you all for joining today. So I'll introduce the speakers. So we've got Camilla Tahar, who's a barrister at 39 Essex Chambers. I first met Camilla a few years ago at a lunch where we discussed all sorts of things relating to sustainability. If I trip over my words today, apologies. Sustainability. Because I discovered her podcast, which she records with Ruth Keating in her same barristers' chambers. She's also the editor of a book on the subject and chair of the board of the Clusters Forum, which I thought sounded like quite a swanky skiing club or something, but it turns out it's not. So Camilla can probably tell us a little bit about that in a short while. Jess James, who's the founding director of Jaws Sustainability. Jaws, just a tiny little bit older than Limeslade. So I think Jess and I first met when we were doing the rounds of networking events and starting up my little business. And Jess's business has grown rather more than ours has. So so Jess is now running a full service sustainability consultancy, helping and advising and certifying all the standards and all of those sorts of things. So that's Jess. And then we've got Casey Rutland. Casey's based out in the Middle East. So we've got a nice international perspective because obviously, Camilla does a lot of work around the world as well. Casey's in the Middle East, Jess based in London. So it's nice to have this kind of international feel to it as well. Casey is probably well known to everyone in the world of construction technology for his work in what was formerly the UK BIM Alliance, not allowance, and latterly NEMA. And we met years ago through that organisation. Casey's a brilliant speaker. If anybody's seen him live, it's absolutely, he lights up the room and entertains everyone, but he's also very knowledgeable on his subject. So he's got this relentless enthusiasm for the benefits of better information in the construction life cycle and also the contribution that that makes to improving sustainability. He now runs Property Cortex, which is a digital transformation consultancy. So that's all three of our speakers. So we're going to have a little chat about sustainability for the next half an hour or so. So thank you to everyone who's joined us and is joining us this morning. So, or it's afternoon, depending on where you are. It's afternoon in most places now, isn't it? So anyway, there seem to be lots of things thrown around that count as sustainability. And there's so many things. We're going to cover some of this sort of stuff in a minute as well. But from social value to BNG to various standards measurement. In one line, very quickly, if I can go through you all, what do we mean in 2025 by sustainability? What does it mean to you guys? So if we start with, say, Camilla, because she's at the top of my screen.
Thanks, Stuart, and thank you for having me on. Well, I'm obviously going to look at what how the courts define sustainability, and look at how it's been defined in the planning context, and that is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs.
Brilliant. That's a classic legal definition. You're going to have a legal definition. So, Casey, what's your thoughts?
Well, how do I top that one? It's for me, it's about doing things better with less impact, with less negative impact. It could be a range of different things, but yeah, that sums it up for me.
Cool. And Jess.
Well, Camilla's description is sort of actually the official description of sustainability. And when I was thinking about this beforehand, I think in construction and in general, there's, as you say, there's all sorts of definitions and things going around that supposedly mean sustainability. And actually what we need to remember is it's really about all use of resource and all impact on the ecosystems that we live in. And actually kind of maybe we need to go back around to thinking about that's the crux of the matter, and maybe not overcomplicate it.
Great. Right. So continuing with that theme of complication, there's lots of probably a bewildering, I've written here, number of certifications, measurement systems for sustainability from all over the world. So things like BREEAM, LEED, SCAR, WELL, FitWell, Neighbours, BNG, social value, etc., etc. So how do people decide, and how do you help people decide what to go for, and how do you help people down that path?
It's a tricky one. As you said, there are numerous certification schemes now, and that number only seems to be growing. I think what we it kind of depends a little bit on what the driver is for using the schemes. If it's a sort of client requirement or funding requirement, or just a marketing, or perhaps for like tenant, generating more commercial value from property, etc. So depending on what the driver is, that sort of then leads to how we might help people choose, because where you've got lots of external drivers, it may be that it's sort of mandated as part of employers' requirements for a project or that kind of thing. But then there'll be other ones where it's more about, okay, what's the best thing that we can use? I think the important things to remember are that there's some similarities, but they're also quite different, all of these things. So if you think about sort of like BREEAM or LEED, and then WELL and FitWell, BREEAM and LEED are all about sustainability. WELL and FitWell are about well-being, health and well-being of the occupants of the building. And so those are, which is also social sustainability. It's very important, and that's why they all dovetail together. But so in those sort of where you're looking at those two things, for example, you probably would use both, because they're driving towards different end games. But then in other scenarios, you might find that you've got there's two similar schemes, and actually you only need to use one. Which will happen on projects that we work on. So quite often we'll work with our clients from as early as we can, get involved, and maybe look at what we would try to do is look at what will bring the most benefit to that building in terms of like actual real impact, rather than just ticking boxes if we don't have to. It's like, for your building, depending, is it a refurb, is it new, is it an old building, what benefit, what good qualities does it already have in terms of sustainability, and kind of do an assessment of what's the best one. So we're trying to drive people to pick the right things that they can do, like make real impact, rather than do loads and loads and loads of schemes to get certified, but not actually think about how that's improving the building.
Brilliant, thank you. Casey, I've got, and I don't know if this is correct, in my notes it says, and there's an opportunity to bring Casey in here, and I can't quite remember why. Did you have some thoughts on that, kind of the myriad of schemes and stuff like that? Was that something that you
I do.
come across?
And obviously I am coming from the technical side, but I should also mention that I am an architect, a qualified architect, but also once I'd finished qualifying as an architect, I kind of went, right, what do I do next? Because of this constant learning thing. So I became trained as a BREEAM assessor. So the sustainability side has been inherent in what I do as an architect. And then when I pivoted into digital transformation, it is still part of what I do. And a lot of the certifications require or schemes require some sort of data about the asset you're certifying. And I think that's a missed opportunity. A lot of people think of BIM, for example, as just a one-off exercise to go through design and construction. And actually what the process is about creating this consistent set of data that can be used for multiple different uses. And sustainability certification is one of them. And it's the same set of data that you're going to use for room and area costing, for life cycle management, for embodied carbon calcs, and all of those things that you can now dashboard. So all of these things are so much easier to do, if I say it quickly. But there is obviously work to do to get into those processes and working and make those digital steps. But once you're on board and on that journey, managing or understanding the impacts that certain design choices you make can be as easy as looking at a dashboard to see whether it's green or red. And you can make informed design decisions in that way that then help your certification. So yeah, it's all about data-driven workflows rather than the digitalization itself. But yeah, that's one thing I'd encourage people to. And as I said in the prep for this call, someone much cleverer than me said, you can't improve what you haven't measured. So we need to get to the point where we're understanding what we're doing and what we have first before we can start to demonstrate improvement over time.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's interesting that applies across. That's the same. We say a similar thing to our clients. How are you measuring? Because a lot of clients come to us on the marketing side and say, we say, how are you measuring your marketing? And how are we, well, we're not really. We've got a website, and where are the visits? And you can't measure. You can't say you're improving unless you're measuring stuff, as you say. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Everything. It's yeah, exactly. So, but next, so. you're in the Middle East, as we've established, Casey, and it tends to, I think, anyway, it could be me, tends to get a bit of a bad rap when it comes to sustainability. We have this kind of picture in our heads, I think, of the Middle East as all burning oil and doing terrible things and digging up the sea and creating islands. Would you say that's fair? And is there a lot of, or is there a different kind of perspective? And I also get the feeling when I've been out to the Middle East that they are working quite hard on sustainability and making quite a lot of progress out there. So what's your perspective and what have you discovered since you've been out there, and how does it all work out for you in that region?
Yeah, your observations are right, but let's put it in square terms. We're not the only country or nation burning oil. There's lots of countries burning oil. It's just whether you're digging it up from the ground or not. So that's primarily due to geography. So yes, the underlying current is that it is an oil producing nation, and that creates a lot of the finance, the funds, and the everything around it. But when we're talking about the built environment, there are lots of targets, and there are lots of net zero targets and carbon neutral targets and things like that are in place across the whole of the GCC and the wider Middle East. So we are improving. It is a place where opportunities are high, ambitions are high also in terms of performance and on the digital side of things, the services they provide to society through those things. And there is obviously a balancing out of the revenues that different countries have based on oil production or based on tourism or any other types of things, which is why you see major sporting events happening more and more in the region. So yeah, I mean, they do have a bad press. They are improving. I would say from my experience so far, there seems to be less red tape involved in achieving those targets. It's kind of like, these are our targets, we're going to get there, get on and do it. And that's the approach that many people take, and there's less bureaucracy wrapped around those various different schemes. So it does seem to be a place that is thriving in that respect. There are reports, there are targets that show that the UAE or the GCC, sorry, have improved a greater level in terms of their carbon reduction. Those reports are generated from within the GCC, so you've got to take that with a pinch of salt in terms of the global statistics. But they do take on board all targets in the same way other countries do. But yeah, when you look at the buildings, the performance of buildings and built assets are absolutely number one in terms of trying to reduce sustainable impacts.
And I know they're doing a lot on kind of solar energy and other forms of energy. You were mentioning the other day that the challenges are actually, you would think there's loads of sun, how difficult can it be? And I'd not thought of the fact that, there's also lots of sand, lots of dirt. And so, yeah.
Exactly that. And there are solar developments there, quite notable ones. When it comes down to more akin to what the UK is doing and having discrete residential or domestic scale solar, it's less attractive, primarily because if we park our car outside in the fresh open air, it's covered in dust by the end of the day. So it's the same applies to solar panels, and it reduces their effectiveness. If you have a maintenance program that says, yes, that's cleaned every day, then fine. They just need to be built in and considered at the right and appropriate stages.
Cool. It's good. So, Camilla, the legal views. How about the legal view from around the world? How are you seeing things? And we always have to, our construction castings, 99% of the time, there's somebody with a legal view, and Camilla's that person today. So how are things developing in the world of sustainability in the law, both in the UK and internationally?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we've been talking about kind of measurement and assessment, and I thought it might be helpful to zoom back out and look at the broader context and the international legal landscape in relation to sustainability and construction to see what we might actually need to measure and assess at the moment and coming up. And just sort of looking back to COP28, the United Nations Environment Programme launched the Buildings Breakthrough with the support of the UK government. And the aim of that, for anyone who doesn't know, was to make near zero emissions and climate resilient buildings the new normal by 2030. So we've got that. And then fast forward to March 2024. Ministerial delegations from countries, including the UK, endorsed what's known as the Declaration de Chaillot, which is the ministerial declaration. And this was at the inaugural Buildings and Climate Global Forum. And it was dedicated to the decarbonisation and climate resilience of buildings. Now, this declaration is really interesting because it acknowledged various things. I won't read out everything that it acknowledged, but But it did acknowledge that by 2050, 68% of the world's population will be living in urban areas. And the global demand for raw materials is expected to double by 2060. But we're bearing that in mind. There's still an inadequate volume of renovations and construction of sustainable buildings. So widening the gap between the construction sector's trajectory and the goal of the Paris Agreement to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees C by 2100. So there was also acknowledgement that the importance of accelerating the transition and keeping within that goal within reach. So various objectives were then set out, which I think is really interesting to look at in context of what we have been talking about and what we might have to assess and measure. And objectives that I think are particularly interesting are those in relation to construction and retrofitting, and that's to plan, design, build, operate, and manage all-round sustainable, culturally, functionally, socially, economically, climate adapted, resource efficient, zero emission, healthy, safe, flexible, and resilient buildings through a whole life cycle approach. So quite a tall order. And commitments included implementing roadmaps, regulatory frameworks, mandatory building and energy codes to move towards carbon neutral buildings. There's also objectives to promote the adoption of labels and standards and certifications, and also to promote the production and development and use of low carbon, durable, and cost effective construction materials. So developments such as these international pledges essentially reflect a growing awareness in the construction industry of its role in achieving net zero, but as well as the growing attention that the industry is receiving in this area. And Stuart, I know you and I have discussed this before, but really interesting case that it's particularly interesting at the moment that shows an increased focus on this sector is the case of Asmania and Holcim. Now, this is a case that was initiated in 2022 by residents of the Indonesian island of Pari, which has been repeatedly flooded as global warming has driven up sea levels. It's a case brought against Holcim, so a global cement manufacturer, for its contribution to climate change and consequently to the financial and non-financial damages suffered by the plaintiffs due to these sea level rises. It's the first set of civil proceedings in Switzerland against a corporation for its contribution to climate change. Oh, thank you, Stuart. I see you've put a link up there. So Holcim is one of the global leaders in the manufacture of cement. It's said to be one of the 50 largest emitters of CO2 worldwide. And according to one study, between 1950 and 2021, it released more than 7 million tons of CO2, which amounts to 0.42% of all global industrial CO2 emissions since the year 1750. So the plaintiffs are arguing that Holcim bears a significant share of responsibility for the climate crisis and for the situation on Parry Island. And what are they asking for? They're asking for proportional compensation from Holcim, financial contribution to adaptation measures on Parry, and a reduction of CO2 emissions by 43% by 2030, 69% by 2040, relative to 2019 levels. Now, really interestingly, on the 3rd of September, a Swiss court heard from both sides and is currently deciding whether or not this complaint is admissible. So I thought there might have been a sort of judgment today, but not as far as I can see. But this case is interesting to me because it shows a very high profile example of the attention on the construction industry and the impact that this might have on materials.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's a fascinating case. That, as Camilla just said, I've put the link to that, a bit more detail on it in the chat box there, and also that, which gives me a good opportunity to remind everyone that you can either put your questions into that chat box or you can put them into, there should be a Q&A option in your menu somewhere. So if you just pop any questions that you've got in the Q&A, that would be lovely. We'd love to have some questions at the end of this. So they're really helpful. There's obviously as we know, lots going on in the world of law to reflect all the stuff that people are doing either voluntarily or indeed through mandatory regulation. So Casey and Camilla, yeah, so it's kind of a mix of questions, but we'll start with Casey. So obviously, Casey, I know you, as we've said already, through the world of technology, but it is definitely something that we've established you see the tech as being an enabler for sustainability. What is it that you're seeing developing that crosses over and helps support those two things together? Why is tech so important for sustainable development?
I think it comes down to that benchmarking. It's that knowing what you have, and having it in an actionable way. It's all very well having something buried in a PDF or a report somewhere, on a computer somewhere. But if you've got intelligent, actionable data, you can start to add different data sources to that to find out why certain things happen, why certain decisions were made, or the way a building or an asset is performing in a certain way. And I think the conversation we had in preparation for this again about the unseen impact of positive developments. And we were discussing at a portfolio level, if an investor has a portfolio of properties and they release a new property that has whatever accreditation or certification, it's a shining example of how good things can be, but does that then devalue the rest of your portfolio in terms of the rental costs and rental values? So big issue things, but without having that data really to understand the impact of those things and any modifications to your existing portfolio to bring them up to the level of other better performing places, you're less aware. It's less easy to make those decisions, and that's really what this digital way of working, whatever the technology might be, it's to enable people to make better informed decisions. And there's a vast amount of data out there. We can't possibly expect every person that needs to input into making those decisions to have read it all or interrogated it all, but we can present it to them in a different way that's relevant to their particular persuasion, if you like, or their particular area, their topic, and we can present them the right data in the right way. They don't need to know everything. They need to just view the full data set with a particular lens to help them make decisions. And that's really what it's all about. So if we take that concept through to any of the challenges that we've got, not just the sustainability ones, whether it's anything to do with managing the built environment, creating things, whether it's corporate organizations preparing their ESG reports and then demonstrating improvement, that's all founded on the basis of data. I should probably also mention, if it's open, standardized data, even better, because we've got a lot of people refer in the data discussions about data lakes. They tend to be more like data swamps because nothing really is healthy enough to give you anything of any value. So yeah, if we clean up that data a bit and provide standardized open data, then it becomes a lot easier to do the things that we've been talking about.
How common is that as a thing? Is it because obviously manufacturers or designers of software and tools that do all of this stuff, we don't want other people to get in, very often don't want you getting into the back end of their data and things like that. Is it becoming increasingly better, or is it still a challenge to get crossover?
Yeah, it's from what I see. I'm also chair of Building Smart UK and Ireland, which is the UK and Ireland chapter of Building Smart International, which promote open data through the built environment. So I see a lot of advancements. I see a lot of startups creating these life cycle analysis dashboards or calculation dashboards or costing dashboards or anything, or tools and resources that we can use to make these decisions. So I do see a lot of that. If you've got standardized data, it's easy to create a tool that can see it and view it, and anyone can do it because it's free and open, but it's a standard as well. If you're starting to do that on proprietary data, then you've got to make a mapping exercise to take this data into a standardized data, then into your software. And it just becomes a mapping exercise and a big overhead in terms of how you're trying to manipulate and understand that information. So yeah, I see a lot of it. I see a lot of positivity, a lot more in the last couple of years. But yeah, there are still a lot of people that have legacy systems that we also need to manage and understand as well. So they work both ways. If you've got a legacy data set you can translate into a standardized one, then you can start to use all of these other tools as well. So there's lots of opportunities, and it's not just because you don't have open data doesn't mean you can't do these things. There's a mapping exercise.
Am I right in thinking, and you may or may not know the answer to this question, is that the sort of work that Paul Wilkinson has been doing, that the government interoperability thing that he's been working on? Is that?
Yeah, so Building Smart UK and Ireland sit within the legal entity that is NEMA. So I was vice chair of NEMA, I'm still chair of Building Smart UK and Ireland. The gig of the government and industry interoperability group is building on that process. They're using the standards developed through Building Smart UK and Ireland, or Building Smart International.
Cool, interesting. And then again, I guess Camilla, I've just put at the end of this is how, and I guess the answer to the question is probably fairly obvious, but how important is the data and tech side of things for lawyers, and how is the legal side of things keeping up with all these changes and developments?
It's a good question. I think that tech as an enabler, and particularly data as an enabler, is really interesting. And in case you mentioned the data swamp, I think that's probably quite a terrifying thing for lawyers and lawyers advising their clients. The reason I say this is because we were sort of thinking about tech and data, and I was thinking sort of about the fact that we're increasingly sort of having to look at new technologies being used and what happens when a construction professional is implementing a new technology that's right at the forefront of their experience, and how does that relate to any sort of professional negligence allegations if that technology actually doesn't work in the way that it's expected to. And there's the old principles apply. So I'm just looking back to how the court dealt with this in 1980 in IBA and EMI and BICC, which is about the sort of design of a television mast. The contractors were working at the frontier of professional experience at the time. And the House of Lords had looked at whether or not they were in duty to exercise reasonable care of skill. And the required standard in new designs and new technologies was considered by the court. And it was held here that we've got to look at being in a position of the contractor when confronted by the daunting task, lacking the knowledge and expert advice with dealing with the problems. And the court said, but those very handicaps created a clear duty to identify and think through problems, so that the dimensions of the venture into the unknown could be adequately assessed and the ultimate decision as to its practicability arrived at. Now, the unknown being adequately assessed is really important. And so that's Casey's sort of point about data as an enabler is fantastic, because that will be incredibly helpful when people are addressing the unknown. But going back to what's slightly terrifying is if you were confronted with a data swamp, it might be arguable from the other side that you had the data there. But how difficult is it going to be to fish around in that swamp and find the data in order to adequately assess how well your new technology is going to work. But I think the sort of bright side that Casey talked about is the fact that this data is available and can be organized in such a way that it is an enabler. And when these new challenges of new technologies arrive, applying these established principles, it should be easier to adequately assess these unknown technologies.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like there's two sides to the story, as there always is. So cool. So finally, as we're coming up to our half an hour, so I've done quite well. I was always pleased when I get it in with our target half an hour. So, Jess, what's the latest on your side of things? What are you seeing evolving? Are there any new standards and things coming in? What's the latest in your world? What are we seeing on the horizon?
I think I've got three answers to this. Going back to what we said earlier about all the different standards and things, I think it's inevitable that we will continue to add more standards, and the standards that we have, the targets will become more stringent over time, and that's sort of a pathway that we've been on. We'll carry on and hopefully will contribute to improvements in how we design buildings to be more to be built more sustainably and operate more sustainably. I think there's a part of all of those play a part in that. I think to tie in the second point, to tie in with what you guys have been saying about data, I think there is potentially a massive opportunity here in terms of accounting for impacts in construction, because I think there is a loss of what we do. There's currently not a huge amount of data to benchmark things like embodied carbon, for example, and the technology is changing dramatically very quickly, and I can see opportunity there for us to really be able to actually understand and quantify impacts in a better way, so that and that's going to change how we work and how we do things. And then the third thing I think is something that we're already seeing in a lot of our projects is that what we have to remember is that the climate has already changed. Like, we've done this already, and we are, temperatures have risen. And so I think a thing that people are sort of thinking about a bit in terms of there's policy surrounding it, but not necessarily really implementing it, is resilience, climate resilience. Camilla, you mentioned that earlier. And how we design to, this is what we have. Like, now it's already, we already have buildings that we can't operate properly because of overheating, for example, and they, that's now. And then what we're going to see in the future is going to be even more challenging. And I think so we've just CIBSE have, the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers, have recently released new weather data files that we have to use for our overheating assessments, and they show significantly higher temperatures and spikes and events and such. So what we're going to have to do in, like, supporting our clients in designing buildings not to overheat is going to change dramatically. And I think we currently, so Part O of the building regulations came in a couple of years ago, which sort of was a stepping stone to that. So we currently, when looking at trying to design buildings not to overheat, it can be quite challenging. And I think from our perspective as people trying to help designers, I think there's going to need to be a fundamental change in what buildings actually look like and how they operate. We have a lot of glass buildings, and we don't necessarily like putting things on the outside to reduce the sun. And I think, which, in other parts of the world, where it's always been hotter, you have things like shutters and external shading and stuff like that, and that's not very fashionable at the moment. And I think so, yeah, that resilience piece, focus on overheating is not just overheating, but that's an interesting one for me because we're seeing it right now happening and trying to make people understand how they need to change something fundamental. So there you go.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that point about shutters. There was a building, I always remember when we were looking at new offices with my old company years and years and years ago, they were putting up a new building opposite the Old Bailey. And the building had been designed so that it would have shutters that would move with the sunlight. So it protected the kind of shading throughout the day. And somebody in the project decided they didn't want that because that would cost in terms of maintenance and repair and things like that. So they just ended up fixing the shutters in one position, which made very little benefit to the actual building, I think. And it was just, they just had them fixed on the outside rather than having them move with the sunlight as it went around the building, which is, it was a disappointment. I was like, that's a shame, because and also it would have been quite cool to see them move through the day. But anyway, so that was something that a real life kind of example of that. Exactly what you say. It's not cool to have these things on the outside, even though there are massive benefits to them. So there we go. So that's all the questions I had. Let me just check to see if there's any Q&A type stuff. Where's the questions? No, nothing yet. If you do have a question, you've got about 2 seconds before I turn it all off and we finish it. So, Christine Gawson has raised her hand. Now that'd be interesting. Do you want to actually speak, Christine? Because I can actually make you do that if you want. I'll do that now and see if Christine actually does. Or it may have just been that Christine had made a terrible mistake and pressed the raise the hand button. But if you wish, there you go.
Thank you, Stuart. I was going to ask, and I was probably going to focus this towards Casey because of his breadth of international experience. Is there an exemplar part of the world, client, project, where there's so much that this subject encompasses? Where is our best practice? Probably can't answer that in 30 seconds, Casey. Apologies.
Yeah, I was going to say, it really does depend on what your focus is. If your focus is on what's the absolute utmost highest level, then you're going to start getting to new cities, which by themselves inherently aren't sustainable because you're building new rather than reusing existing. So yeah, there's so many different aspects to that question in terms of what you're doing. Yeah, I think your best practice isn't going to come from one place. It's going to come from multiple different sources of people doing amazing things, but they may have slipped somewhere else or not performed as well as they thought they might in other aspects. Yeah, it's entirely geographic and technology based and target based, really.
Has anyone else got any thoughts, Camilla or Jess? Where maybe you've seen something amazing and thought, oh, wish we could be like that. Nothing.
I think
Nothing springs to
I'd
mind.
agree with
No.
Stacey. It
Yeah.
really depends on what the focus is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Well, I think that was a bit of a venture into the unknown. I don't think we've ever had somebody raise their hand and we bring them in live before. We normally just do the questions. So I was quite enjoyed that. Right. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. So thank you to all the speakers, as always, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this morning. Or afternoon. Sorry, I keep thinking it feels like morning to me. And then we will have another one next month. I can't quite remember what Annie's got in mind for next month, but she will. It's probably something in the run-up to our masterclass in November, which is happening in Dubai. So it'll likely be something international, I should imagine. So Annie will send you out an email very soon. I've made some notes on that. So obviously, as usual, we record these, we put them on the YouTube and we put them on our podcast. I've also made some notes of some of the kind of things that people might not have been familiar with, and I'll send out a little email shortly with some links to the things like the cases that Camilla mentioned and some of the other organisations that we've discussed over the course of the morning. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you again soon.